other, we had 2 kids. So our son and his wife, and now they'll have 4 children live next to us. In fact, my son is my wife's partner. My wife has a business, and he started in the business, and now is her partner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's a whole family thing.
That takes special understanding.
It does. They are the right personality. I've said I wouldn't be able to do that. But my son got my wife's personality. Very calm, very
Now,
quiet.
here in Texas, we have 3 grandchildren in San Antonio.
I wish I had that many grandchildren. I've got 3, and I think 3, and I think we're done.
Yeah, some of the barbecue is amazing. We're about
There's an occasional hazelnut and almonds. It's good nuts. We're waiting for John to tell us
Ready.
he's ready. He's ready. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you for your patience as we got lined up technology-wise and we ended our training this morning. I'm going to call this work session of the Washington County School District Board of Trustees to order, and we will start with our roll call. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam President. President Taylor.
I'm here.
Vice President Nicolette.
Good morning.
I am here. Our student is not here. Beth Smith, Trustee Smith.
Here.
Trustee Rodriguez. Trustee Mayberry.
Here.
Trustee Church.
Here.
Madam President, we have a quorum.
All right. Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. We're going to go to our roll call. And even though it's International Angie Day, I hear that I am sharing this birthday with Miss Coley. So, Miss Coley, if you would lead us in the pledge.
Yes, happy birthday.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oh, yeah. Good. All right, thank you very much. Okay, we're going to go. We have one item on our agenda for today, as you know, and Dr. Osbury is here before us. I'll introduce it. Agenda item 2.01, presentation, discussion, and possible action to consider and approve the process for the annual contractual requirement for the performance evaluation of the Washoe County School District Superintendent of Schools, including timelines and evaluation criteria and format for the 2022-23 school year performance evaluation. This is for possible action. And before I turn it over to Dr. Tom Alsbury, who is the founder of balanced governance, which is the model we use. Just unfortunately, the superintendent was not only delayed, but she actually didn't have a flight yesterday to get back, and she's all the way across the country, and so she is working to make her way back now. We'll hopefully be here this afternoon. I believe her travel is on schedule. So far, so good right now. And then she will join us then. Typically, of course, in her contract, it says that we agree with this and we do this together with the superintendent. And so any decisions that we make today certainly will be pending the input of the superintendent, and we may need to make adjustments moving forward. We've had the chance to have a conversation. She's been involved in this early work, and so hopefully we'll all be there. But I wanted to put that out there on the record in case that is necessary to do. So that being said, Dr. Tom Alsbury.
Thank you, President Taylor. As we introduce a model of superintendent evaluation. I reviewed that evaluation model, and from what I think that a board, and what I'm going to recommend that the board do is today, as much as it's possible with the superintendent being absent, is to see if we can get to a place where you can approve, just like the agenda says, the model itself. I think establishing that this is the model, and then the more specific details within the model, which would be 3 items. The first one being agreement on, and if possible, I don't know, are we going toward approval of anything with the superintendent being absent, or are we just?
Yes, we are.
We are.
Excuse me. I had a chance to speak with her yesterday, and she's been involved up to this point.
Okay.
To where we are, and then again, just as a reminder for everyone, and now that we're on public record, as opposed to being in our training, this is a one-year evaluation. We are at the end. Assuming evaluations relate directly to the strategic plan. We are in year 2 of a 2-year strategic plan, which is called Response to Recovery. This should hopefully be reviewed, but let me help us all put our arms back around it. So this is year 2. So that plan is already in place, and this is year 2 of that, and the board has already approved the plan and some of the and the goals and the initiatives and the objectives and all of that. And Dr. Osbury would take us through more of that. So our job today is to say how do we really focus it, narrow it down. This is for the 2020. This for the 22-23 school year. Okay, the 22-23 school year only. Only in January, the district will undergo a very thorough, comprehensive process of developing a new strategic plan, which will be initiated and will be in place by July 1, which is our existing plan, Response to Recovery, ends on June 30th. Then at that point, a conversation will happen around the evaluation of the superintendent based upon that strategic plan. So this is a 1 year. Right. Again, it's unusual because the superintendent wasn't here when these were put in place. Anyway, but as she walks in, she knew about this. She knew of this Response to Recovery, so she knows it's there. So between this and then having her have an opportunity to weigh in, trying to focus those a little bit to the 5 goals and some initiatives in here. So she has had a chance to have some input in some of this, and because our philosophy as a board has always been to do an evaluation with the superintendent and not to the superintendent, which is why it's in her contract that she'll be a part of this process. She has said that she's comfortable with us moving forward based
Okay.
upon those shared understandings that we all already have, and we've made a lot of decisions already going in, and that, but understanding that if there's some tweaks that she might request when she comes back, then we can bring it up and address it at that time. But she wants to move straight forward, so we can have that in place and get to the work.
Great. Thank you, President Taylor.
President Taylor.
I'm sorry, Trustee Smith. Sorry, Dr. Alfieri.
Not to be obtuse, but when we say the 1 year, we literally mean this current school year,
Yes,
not a consecutive calendar year starting now. It's literally this school year we are
Yes.
living in right
Right now, that's the 2022 to 23 school year. And typically, from a calendar standpoint, the superintendent evaluations across the country don't occur until November, December, usually October at the earliest, because that's when the data is available for the results on the previous school year. And part of how they're evaluated is on the data. Right, and so obviously we have to wait until the data is finalized, and so it's typically done November, December, and really school districts across the country is not atypical for that, and it's because of that reason, and so that's why there will not be an evaluation this year because Superintendent Enfield was not here during the last school year. And we would typically be doing an evaluation now for the 2021-22 school year, but she was not here. Obviously, we know Dr. McNeil retired. So this is just positioning us, codifying it, make sure we pull in things that she's noticed in the reentry plan, things that the board we voted on some things and agreed upon, voted on some things along the year, and how do we put all that together? And it's not atypical to have an outside consultant lead us in that conversation, because it really does put HR in a difficult position to be in charge of the evaluation of their boss. And then plus it lends to the credibility and the fidelity of the process when there's an outside third party as well. So,
Great. Thank you very much. So I didn't want to misspeak. So to my mind, my recommendation, if possible, so you can move forward, there are 4 primary decisions to be made by the board. The first one is the model at writ large. This was in the training packet, and I don't know if we had talked about printing this off as a separate item. Do you have that in front of you, or Vanjie, did you give him the part that for the meeting, just the
circle?
evaluation implementations?
I think we have. What's it entitled?
Yes, there you go, JJ. That's
which one is that?
Balanced governance, superintendent evaluation, implementation.
So find that.
Hold, please.
It looks like this.
Was that a hard copy, or was that in our packet?
It's included. This is included in the training packet, but I had asked Vanjie if she would take this out of the packet for this meeting because I didn't
That's okay.
want the board taking action on training materials. But
Yes. Just going to say it's what we looked at earlier. Yes.
Right.
And it's is some board docs available for the public? Okay. Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome.
So
All right.
it was starting on page 19 of your training packet, but I believe there's a separate copy of this.
It should be, but there's no reason for us to get 2.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right.
As long as it's available publicly.
Then we're okay.
Right, then as long as
Great.
the public has it, we can save some trees. We don't need a new
Okay,
separate copy.
great.
We can use this one. Yeah, it's right here. We have it right here before us, Vanjie. Thank you.
Okay,
Yes, yes.
good. I didn't want to break any rules.
No,
so-
we don't want to. It's the most important thing is it's available that what we have, the public has on this open meeting, and they have that available. It's on board docs, and we have hard copies, so we're good. Thank you.
So back to my recommendation, if possible, is for the board to make 4 decisions. The first one is on the model writ large. The second, we get into some details, and that is the various objectives, objectives, I want to use the right terms, from the response to recovery strategic plan. I'm recommending that the board focus in on 6
That's this one right here.
objectives. The objectives for consideration are on a single sheet, and so you'll want to have that available. That is entitled Potential Areas of Focus is how it starts. And then 2 additional decisions, one on the specific range scoring ranges and the wording that will be used for the evaluation. This would be the rating scale of the various objectives. And finally, and fourth, would be approval of the rating categories and criteria for the growth statements that would go into the evaluation.
Everyone remember we were looking at, do we want to have that in alignment with what we do with educators as opposed to what may be more typical?
And that
And we-
was, and
Yes,
so.
and then
yeah.
that was just handed out to us so we could see. Here's an example from the educator piece.
So,
Okay.
this is the third, this is the rating scales and terminology, and then the rating scales and criteria cutoff, basically point, for the comments in the evaluation.
right.
You'll see that if you would like to turn to at slide 24. So if you have your packet, you can go to slide 24 to remind yourself of those, the terminology.
Everyone remember that? We were talking about that, okay, from our training, and we know that's been on board doc, so we aren't leaving anybody behind.
Can I clarify?
All right, yes, please, go right ahead.
So are we recommending at this point that we use what was previously suggested and switch to the NEPF scoring, or is that still for debate?
That's for conversation. That's for conversation. That's action the board would take. We would decide whether we could. I mean, I guess we can even come up with our own, but I don't know why we would do that. But whether we stay with the more traditional ones or whether we stay with those that are utilized currently for our educators. Okay, is that your question? That is number 3, right? In terms of the 4 things that Dr. Osbury would like us to make decision, the 4 decision points. That's decision point number 3. Okay. All right.
Okay, so there's a couple of ways that we could do this. The terminology for the ratings, the words, and the scales, and the terminology for the comment section, which is slide number 24.
We don't, let's see, slide 24.
You should have. I think you had a printout of the training slides.
Is that this one?
It's
No,
not
we don't
page
have- we don't have a
24. Oh, you
printout
don't
of the
have
slides.
the slides themselves.
We have it in our, we have it, yeah. We don't have the hard copy, but we have
So
it in board
let's,
docs.
yeah,
have it in board
we
docs.
can go to that, thank you, to slide 24, so you can just have a visual to remember what I'm talking about. The next one, that one right there.
Yes, okay,
So
yes.
that's the 4th item, and it was how we're going to rate, you are going to have the
The
comments rated and which comments would be included. So if this makes sense, hopefully I don't confuse everyone, but what you're seeing on the screen right now, that, and then also the rating scale that you just received, the what's currently used for in the district. Those 2 things, that language is part of the evaluation model. And so my recommendation is that those 2 decisions should be made first. Then you would be free to adopt the model, and then you would be ready to adopt the objectives that you're going to focus on. Does that make sense?
Everybody good? Everybody tracking? Okay, awesome.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to recommend that you, and this, I'll kind of pass it back to you, Dr. Taylor, this just open for a conversation, discussion by the board, and whatever you're going to do with the rating scales, this document right here.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Osbury. So if I can draw everyone's attention to, we have 2, these are the categories, right? And thank you, JJ has them on the screen. This is what's currently used. Can everyone, I think we're going to need that to be a little bigger. Okay, she'll fix, JJ's going to figure it out. We know that. All right, thank you very much. Today's my birthday. I'm a little older. Help my eyes. Okay. All right. So these are the categories that are traditional, that are currently used for our educators. And the board made a decision previously that we would like to use the same categories for our administrators, in particular our superintendent, as we do for the educators. I think administrators use this as well, as opposed to what the more typical, which is on page 24. Or the packet we worked from this morning, the more on the very back, you can see 4 categories there: unsatisfactory, developing, proficient, and distinguished. Or do we have an interest in being in alignment with our educators, which is ineffective, developing, effective, and highly effective. So that's the first decision point that Dr. Alsbury needs. So I'll open it up for discussion now. Clerk Manetto, and then I see Trustee Mayberry.
Thank you, Madam President. I kind of like going with what we have established in the district because our educators can glance at this and know exactly what it's saying.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's what I have to
Okay.
say.
All right. Thank you, Clerk Manetto. Then we have Trustee Mayberry, and then Trustee Smith, and then Rodriguez.
Well, no, thank you, Madam President. I guess it was just sort of a clarifying question. I think Trustee Minetto answered it. But just to be clear, because there's been a lot of information presented, which I appreciate very much. But again, this is what the Washington County School District uses when we evaluate our administrators
And teachers.
and teachers. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Trustee Mayberry. Trustee Smith, and then Trustee Rodriguez.
Thank you, President Taylor. Okay, I'm comfortable with the words, switching out the 4 words, but not necessarily the overall score range. So are we just talking
We're
about
just talking
switching out the
words right
words?
now. We're going to do words first, then we're going to do score range, right? Because all that's a part of the model, right? Words, because that's a different conversation,
Excellent.
right? That's a different conversation.
If we are talking about those 4 words instead of these 4 words, then yes.
Okay. All right. Trustee Rodriguez?
Ditto.
Okay, ditto. All right, so that being the case, looks like we're working towards some consensus, looking for a motion if that's the pleasure of the board. Oh, no, a public comment, thank you. Ooh, thank you. Do we have public comment on this?
The board received an email from Joe Morabito related to this agenda item.
Oh,
as a
for the
whole.
agenda item, okay, thank you. Let's make sure we're taking a look at the email public comments as they come in. Thank you, JJ. Okay, looking for a motion, and we'll look, if that's the pleasure of the board, for which 4 words we'll use for the ratings. Okay, Dr. Nicolette?
I move that we use the final rating terms, highly effective, effective, developing, and ineffective, for the 2022-23 superintendent evaluation.
Thank you very much. There is a motion on the floor. Is there a second? Second by Trustee Manetto. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none? All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? Okay, the motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. And then as Dr. Alsbury shared previously, that's more common the practice in school districts is to use the same terminology that's used for educators. So, okay, that's first decision point, because there's an A and a B to a decision to one of those. So that's A. And then let's go to the scoring ranges. Scoring ranges. And if we have the one that's here before us, right? And then JJ, if you wouldn't mind just putting on the screen those from what Dr. Alsbury shared with us this morning. It's on I don't know. It's on page 22 in our packet. There we are. All right, as she slides there, we have that before us, and you can. Which page? It's on page 22 in our packet. 22, 5B is where you find it. We looked at that a little bit. Just wanting everybody tracking. All right, there we are. Thank you, JJ. And I just have that on the screen because we know we have this hard copy in front of us. So this is just conversation starters, in terms of this. Do you have a recommendation all around this, Dr. Alsbury? I see what you have on and what you've handed out to us, and then it's a little bit different than what was used in the past. You mind helping us with that a little bit?
Yes. I think, by the way, I'm realizing, and I apologize to the board, that the numbers that I presented to you don't work. Because if you have the criteria listed as the lowest rating is 1, a value of 1, the next one 2, 3, and 4, the maximum that you could reach would be 4,
Right, and it
would be
goes
the
up to
rating.
5.
So I have it up to 5, which is incorrect. The rating range from 1 to 4 that is shown on your document is more accurate than what I presented. So
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Alsbury. We'll have, then why don't we see, do we have any further, just nothing, no, well, this is the same item, well, it's another vote, so.
Wait, could we clarify that? So a 5 isn't possible? Or aren't we deciding that now?
yeah, so it really gets back to what value you place on each item in the Likert scale. So I presented in what you see on the screen just 4 choices. If we said unsatisfactory equals 1, developing equals 2, proficient equals 3, and distinguished equals 4, if everybody picked distinguished, the maximum number that you could achieve would be 4. The average would be 4. The only way that it works to go to 5 is if you said unsatisfactory equals 2, and then 3, 4, 5, distinguished being 5.
You have some people frowning, so let's ask questions to make sure it's clear if it isn't clear. I'm tracking, but I want to make sure we all,
Yeah.
but I've done this before, so that's kind of right? Please continue, Trustee Smith.
Yeah, I mean, it could really go either way. I mean, and
Right,
so in
that's
case
right.
anyone was wondering among my colleagues, the reason why I was geeking out on this so much during the training is because something that I do professionally is spend a lot of time on corporate rating systems because there's a lot that's built into this. And it is, again, we're talking about an educational system, but many corporate rating systems, which are used across the board, generally have 3 as being your solid performance. You did what we asked you to do. You did a perfectly good job. You did exactly what you did. And then they use the percentages or the other designations of 2 as 1, building on as you increase in your proficiency. And then they use 4 and 5 to reach levels of increased distinguished or highly effective ratings. You could go either way, but I just want to point out that there is a reason why, by and large, so many large public companies use a 5-point scale. I'm not saying what the state does or what we do is wrong. I just want to make sure that we are aware that 3 is very commonly, you did what we asked, how we asked, good job. And then you have your ratings above and below. But that's just to share from my background.
No, and please, go ahead, Trustee Mayberry.
No, I guess it's more of a clarifying question. Again, it may sound like a criticism. It's not intended to be, but why wouldn't we just use the same rating system that we just approved with the ranking? What would?
Well, we could. We could. That's just part of the conversation.
To me, that seems more consistent.
Well, and I'll just respond a little bit to the 5-point scale. I'm familiar with that as well in my real life, so to speak. And in my mind, as I look at this, is we also have 5 typically what I've seen is there are actually 5 categories in that as well.
That's right.
We just approved 4 categories.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
to me, that's where the difference aligns, is because there's a place in 5, and that's usually competent or some word along those lines. You do it, you do the job we asked you to do. Okay, great, that's competent, that's 3.
Yeah.
And then this is a little bit more competent, and then, you're kicking butt. This is, almost there, getting there. 5 is we need to have a meeting, right? I mean, so usually there are 5 categories, which makes 3, that makes it really clear. And because in educational systems there are 4, that's what makes it kind of gray. I remember going through that same thing. I was like, wait a minute. Mm-hmm. So that's in my mind how I kind of say, okay, I get it's not what I'm accustomed to, but I get that because again we have 4 categories instead of 5. So, Trustee Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam President. Kind of on the same board with Trustee Mayberry. I mean, we have someone here that's working, and we use it for our own staff. Why not use it for our superintendent? And I know kind of we talked about this in training, you know, you got 3 to 4, then you got 4 to 5. So if you land on 4, where do you break? You know, I know we kind of talked about that a little bit, but so I mean, I think for this situation here, especially Dr. Info walking in halfway through, this is probably the more, in my mind, efficient way to go.
Okay. Thank you, Trustee Rodriguez. Clerk Manetto?
Thank you, Madam President. And I would agree with that. What we already have in place makes sense to me, and it's very readable for the teachers and the staff, because you suddenly throw another number in there and you're like, wait, what? Because that's not what they're used to. They could figure it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Clerk Manetto. Looking for the Trustee Smith?
So I struggle with this. I know that this is what the State Board of Education has approved, but I don't love the ranges. I really don't. And the reason is because effective has such a huge net. So, I mean, I would be open to us tweaking this, but so here's the thing. This is where potentially change can happen. We can adopt it because that's the way that it is now. Or in my case, I'm going to say that I don't love the way that these ranges are because, for example, effective casts way too large of a net, whereas highly effective only has, 0.4 for possibility. So I know that this is the way it is. I understand wanting to match it, but we can also signal that we want it to be better than this. So I'm just going to kind of put it out there. And to be specific, like if I were looking at these numbers, I would say that I would want to at least bring some mathematical balance to the ability to hit these. And an example is that, 3.51 to 4.0 could be highly effective. I don't love how that effective net is so wide because a 2.8, I don't mind, in other words, I don't mind if we go by like 0.5s or we break this down differently, but I don't actually love these scoring ranges. I think it's too wide of a net for in the middle, and it doesn't really recognize where someone should be developing versus when they're on the higher end of effective.
Okay. Thank you, Trustee Smith. Dr. Nicolette?
I would agree with that, and I am comfortable with this because, to me, what's most important in my experience has shown is this is something that's easy to understand. The meat in the evaluation is the growth concepts and those targets that we want to set for the future. This is just kind of a way to make a simple rating, and it's the discussions and it's the intentionality after that I believe really make a difference. And for the first year, I think this is basic enough. For the second year, maybe we change it.
Thank you, Dr. Nicolette. Further discussion? If not, looking for a motion, if that's the pleasure of the board. Trustee Church?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Trustee Meaver?
Yeah, I guess this is more discussion. Extremely well said, but I'm comfortable either way, but I'll make a motion, we'll see what we think.
Okay.
I make a motion that we stick with the existing NEPF scoring ranges as presented.
Okay. Thank you, Trustee Church. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Motion by Trustee Church and second from Trustee Mayberry. Is there further discussion? Okay. Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? Okay, the motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. And again, remember, this is 1 year. And so certainly an opportunity to take a look and see what can be better. So that's our first decision point, A and B. Okay, the next, go ahead, Dr. Osberg.
Yeah, the next point of decision, which would be a potential modification of the model that I've presented, is on the screen for your consideration. I want to be sure that you are comfortable with the language on how we select the recommendations for growth, and then how those recommendations for growth would get on the final draft. And so that's in the gray box. So any recommendations for growth that had an average of 3 to 4, 3 or higher, would be placed on the final draft. And any suggestions for recommendations for growth rather, that would be below a 3.0 would not be included on the final evaluation draft.
Thank you, Dr. Osbury. And I would just add, before I go to Trustee Smith, just add that, remember, all comments will still be a part of, right, the record. It wouldn't make the form, so to speak, but if I have a comment and I'm the only one who has this comment, right, good or bad, it wouldn't make the final form if I was the only one, because it wouldn't rise up to a level of an average of a 3. However, it would still be there for the public to see, for the superintendent to see, and so on. Okay, so that voice isn't lost.
Mm-hmm.
Trustee Smith?
Thanks, President Taylor. Mr. Osbury, for the record, can you explain what you mean by the averages? Because we're each submitting our own recommendation, but then you are kind of aggregating them, and I think that's really important to clarify.
Yeah, thank you. So we would include, as President Taylor indicated, and this is very important for the community to note, that all suggestions or recommendations for growth for that superintendent evaluation would be available for the public to view. They would be listed anonymously, but every comment from every trustee would be there. This, we frequently, however, will receive 60, 70 from a board this size recommendations for growth. Well, that's too many. It's unmanageable. So in order to come to a consensus of the board on a manageable number of suggestions for growth, I ask each of the trustees in this process to give a rating, as you see on the screen. So then I'll just talk you through. So I would receive 7 individual rating sheets for a given comment. Let's just take comment number 1. All the trustees would give it a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1, given how strongly they felt that should be included in the final evaluation. I would add all of those numbers, divide by 7 to get an average, and any average rating that was 3 or above would be placed on the final evaluation form, and anything below would not be, as it's stated right now. Of course, the board is free to make adjustments to that.
And just one step further, that means that we all see all of those comments, so we are all ranking all of them, not just our own.
That's correct. You would see all the comments from all the trustees, but they would be anonymous. They'd be a list of all the comments, but not attached to any individual trustee. Yeah.
Okay. Trustee Smith, thank you. Trustee Church?
And then to clarify, is it possible, not likely, but possible, that at that point we end up with too many or not enough, and then how would we call that?
It is possible for that to happen. It's a great question, Trustee Church. In this model, you might recall from the training that there is a final discussion. So the draft, I would put together the ratings. The draft final evaluation would go back to the trustees, to the board, and then you would have an open meeting to discuss the superintendent evaluation, and that would be the opportunity to narrow that down. So that's the time, and the superintendent, of course, would be involved in that discussion as well. And so you would see how many suggestions for growth, and if the board and superintendent felt that was still unmanageable and needed to be narrowed even further, then that could be done as part of that conversation. My recommendation in the current contract, this process, I'm involved in my proposal in the entire process at various points. This would be a place where I would be involved. So in other words, at that discussion, I would be here physically, and part of my job would be to help facilitate a process to narrow those comments down even further if that's what the board wanted to do.
I was actually just thinking, will we still end up with too many? So that certainly answered that. Thank you, Trustee Church. Other questions, comments? So we're all aware, just quick review. We all were giving our comments on each of the areas. And we'll submit them all to Dr. Alsbury. Dr. Alsbury will compile them, list every comment from every trustee, on each of the areas, and then we go through each individual comment and decide if it's critical to include, if I prefer to include it, if it's unnecessary, or I just prefer not to have it. And then we all rate them, they get assigned points, he computes the average, and then that's the basis. And then it would be final once it's all compiled and comes back here for the open public conversation about the evaluation. And if there's still 12, let's say, under something, and then that's part of the conversation we'll have as a board with the superintendent. Hey, how do we narrow this 12 down to something that's manageable? Because we can't expect anybody to have 12 areas of growth in any one area, especially if there's 5 areas, right? So that's the process that we're talking about. Okay, from there. Okay?
Yeah.
Dr. Nicolette?
Out of curiosity, what types of statements do you find are prefer not to include?
Well, when the rating goes back to each of the trustees, there'll be instructions included in that sheet, which reminds the trustees that of this grouping of suggestions for growth, however many that might be, that you really want to target no more than 10, I would say 8 to 10 suggestions for growth maximum. And so you would already, when you're making your decisions, you'd already in a sense be trying to get down to that number. In terms of, and so that's where the prefer not to include, that's a decision you would need to make. So the way that I would think about it, and in the instructions I mention this, that I would go through and make your decisions based on the first rating, that is, it's critical to include. So note the comments that you're saying, this is a critical comment to include, and then go back and see how many you have. And if you have between 8 and 10, then that's where you need to stop, if that makes sense. Because you could look at the 60 comments and say they're all good comments. They all could be included. They're all legitimate. You might not strongly disagree with any of them. So what we're trying to do is find out which ones you believe are the most critical to include.
And then, of course, we see all the statements so that we can cull out the redundancies.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nicolette. Trustee Mayberry?
Thank you, Madam President. So this is all sort of in the context of the balanced governance model that we've talked about. So as a kind of piggybacking on what Vice President Nicolette said, say you have, I'm just asking us to think more for clarity than anything, but you have 2 different comments that are completely different. I say, strong ability to build relationships, and Diane says needs to improve relationships. How do you reconcile something like that?
Yeah. Well, first, the good news is that through this process, because we're getting ratings from all the trustees, I have not come across that. That hasn't happened, okay, actually, in all the times I've used it. Because you might have one trustee have a completely different rating on a comment, but you're not likely to have the majority or the consensus of trustees split on an item. But if that were to happen, let's just say that it did happen, that again goes back to that conversation that you would have as a trustee group. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Alsbury. Did we do public comment on this one yet, JJ? And there was none? Here we go. We just don't have any. There we go. Whether we did it or not, we know we're covered. We have no additional ones. Okay. All right. So really back here, what we're looking at again is how do we really put together all of the comments that we make, and then narrow them down, and then make the decision as to what will go to the final draft for opportunities for growth for the superintendent. So if there's no further discussion, I'm looking for a motion if that's the pleasure of the board. Trustee Smith?
I move that we adopt the ratings for areas of growth statements as recommended by Dr. Alsbury.
Thank you, Trustee Smith. Is there a second? Seconded from Clerk Minetto. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Opposition? All right, the motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. That is decision point number 2. Okay, back to you, Dr. Osbury.
I think the next decision, now that some of the details within the model have been revised and approved by the board, we're at a place to consider the entire model. And so that would be in your training packets. Would be pages 19 through 24.
Okay. Now, before we even start, let's see if there's public comment, so I'll make sure I don't miss this. Okay. Thank you, JJ. Okay, so again, we're looking at the guide that talks about all of the background information, which you know is important, the purpose, the intro, a little review of the balanced governance model, which is really important so we know what direction we're going on, we're going in, the process and the criteria. The really important piece as we walk through was the evaluation cycle. Okay, and we're working on this cycle at this point now, and we're looking at really at the first and the second on this cycle. And Dr. Osbury, the process and criteria, and then the decisions on the goals and indicators. At this point, that's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's right. We're actually engaged in the first step, first and second steps.
We're engaged in the first and second, and we've reviewed this. So, just as a point of pointing out for the public, you can know exactly where we are, and looking at, we will continue. There's more to the model. The next steps, as you can see here, would be the mid-year performance review and revision. Here in the Washington County School District, we haven't had a mid-year time, but after the beginning of the year, we begin to look at, as data is available, look at some of those the indicators, the objective, I should say, and then the staff brings forth the indicators for those objectives, and we get a chance to get reports on those as we go. There may be some revisions before we get towards the end of the year, but there won't be revisions for the upcoming year, which is what we did last year. We did revisions for the upcoming year. This one we wouldn't, because there's going to be a new strategic plan, right, for the upcoming year. And so we continue on reviewing the progress. That happens, and then we begin the evaluation process, as Dr. Osbury just walked us through a little bit. So this is what we're looking at. You see a good picture of it. Thank you, JJ, for having that on the screen. Awesome. And then it goes through the rest of the process, okay, with some recommendations for when this would occur, by October, by November, December. Again, those are recommendations, and that's why it's really a buy in there. If it is to be in earlier, that's okay, but it certainly can't be before the data is available. Okay. All right. Discussion on that. We spent quite a bit of time on this, where we spent the bulk of our time in the training and understanding it and why it's important. So, Dr. Dye?
Thank you. So, Dr. Alsbury, how does public input, what role does it play in this process?
Sure.
That's just a good question. Get that out there in the record.
Great
public
question.
meeting. Yep. Thank you.
In the it's really item number 2. If you look at item number 2 up there, and it's on the screen right now, the board will be, in just a moment, actually, the final decision to be made is to select the objectives that you want to focus the evaluation on for this year, and that includes measurable outcomes. So when the board chooses to accept an objective to be part of the evaluation, it brings with it, and it are indicated in your response to recovery strategic plan, it indicates what data or inputs is going to be included in that objective, is how that objective will be measured. Now, I know this is a little bit of a convoluted answer, but within those performance objectives, and I want to use the terminology, or measurable outcomes, let me use the correct terminology. Within the measurable outcomes of an objective, you will see, and this is a public document everyone can look at, you'll see that within there is opportunities for the public to give input.
And if I may jump in, what part of that, what may be, what I would envision is at some point as we continue to move in the process, there's again, back to our assessment team, is getting an assessment team involved in what other more quantitative information that could be pulled from the climate survey, right? Could be pulled from community survey. These are things that we've done in the past. From a confidential survey from staff, right? Teachers, educators, and so on. And typically what the assessment team will do is from those surveys, right, have specific questions that relate to specific areas, and we get those results. Because those are surveys that are done. And the thing that, except for the public survey is not done except on the superintendent unless we ask for that. But let's take the climate survey for an example. That's done all the time. Right, and so there'll be different questions in the climate survey that might relate to, let's just say, one of these areas of goals that may fall under family and community engagement, right? So there may be a couple of questions from there that they will pull out and say, here are the responses, here's the data on those questions that can help us. Make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so is that they will do that from there. They will do that from if the board says we'd like a community survey, okay, and I think the board's going to want a community survey, right? And then they will do that same thing. And what are those questions on the survey that relate to these areas? And what that helps us do is I'm reading the results of these surveys, right? I'm looking at if there's evidence that we've gotten from Vanjie on different things that were accomplished. We see the data, and that's how I'm making my decision as a trustee for what rating I'm going to give the superintendent, based upon this and this and this. That informs my decision making.
Thank you. And so we use previous information, and we can also up the game, so to speak, and request additional information as it would relate to those areas that we choose to evaluate.
It would be it would be information from this school year, right? So we wouldn't use any previous, right? Because that wouldn't be fair, right? It would be information. So when they do the climate survey in the spring of this year.
At the time when we do this, it will be previous
At the
data,
time,
yeah?
it will be,
Okay.
yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But any of the things that we consider will be from a survey done,
Yes, thank you.
from this school year, community input, teachers, staff, faculty, whatever, all from this school year.
So to clarify, thank you, to clarify, that is some circular thinking, but yes, I have to keep reminding myself of that. So it's not as if we would to glean more information about what the public has thought about 2022-23, that we would do a tell us what you thought form.
I don't say that again.
So let's just say, I'll just use some dates. So in November of basically 2023, we're evaluating 2022-23. And in November 2023, we want to go out to the public and in person say, tell us what you thought. Rather, in addition to using old data, here's some up now and personal related to those goals and indicators that we chose, measurables that we chose.
My recommendation would be if we're going to do, doing that survey, let's not do it after the year. Because we understand, as hard as it is for us to keep up with, this was the end of the 2022-23 school year. We know that. But then we come out in November and say, we don't care about what's happening with you now. We want you to remember what happened to your kid a year ago, or what experience you had a year ago, or your interaction with the superintendent 8 months ago. You see what I mean? So I would recommend that in doing so and asking for staff input and community input, that is done during that or right at the very, which is the summertime, so we wouldn't want to do it in the summertime because then you don't have high participation. Right out, the fairest, most accurate thing to do would be to do it then. Because you asked me in September about an experience I had with the superintendent last December. Right, I'm talking about what happened to me last week when I went to school and, right.
So we might do it in February.
And that's what we need the assessment team.
Thank you.
Right,
Yeah.
because they do a climate
That's right.
survey, and you don't want to survey, and kill people, with a survey fatigue and so on. That's what we need to survey. Our job is the what, right? We want a community survey,
Correct.
and then it's for them to figure that out. Right,
Yeah.
that's the how, but we're the what. If that's what it is that we say, we want to make sure we survey staff. That's the what. Then they figure that out.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, we're going to be asking them in November about what happened last year. So, which is why we let the experts do it, right? Because it makes sense to us. Shoot. Right. So that would certainly, that's what I would be looking would be the most accurate way to do it, right? And I believe we've done it like that with the most success in the past in that way. And that's only fair for parents and staff and community members to be able to talk about this school year, during this school year or at the very end. But again, that's summertime, so no one wants to do a survey in July. That isn't fair either. Other questions, comments? Just good questions, comments, things to consider, for sure. Would this be the time, Dr. Alsbury, and maybe I can look to you, legal counsel, if we need to, if the board wants to say, hey, we want to make sure that there's survey information that's collected on this from students. Would this be the time to do that?
Well,
I mean,
that's up to the board to decide, but what I would say is, and you explain it very well, President Taylor, is that the data, the specific data that is being collected, which is called a measurable outcome in this response to recovery strategic plan document, that's where that kind of thing goes. If you look through these various measurable outcomes, you'll see, for example, in 1.2, in Objective 1.2, which is about academic learning, it specifically says that the following measures will be used to close the achievement gap: smarter, balanced, meeting standard rate. That's a specific test that's going to be used. The 4-year cohort graduation rate, that's a specific metric. And it would be no different for this discussion about community surveys. So as when your team from the district, your assessment team, brings you this document, if you're saying we have a goal on community relations, let's say, family and community engagement, let's be specific, goal number 3, that's the place where if you as a board wanted there to be a community-wide survey conducted under one of those objectives, probably I would guess it would be community engagement, that objective 3.1, that's where you would express that as a board member. And then vote and make a decision on that.
So would that be today, or is that the next? That's probably sounds like that's.
I don't think so, because this document has already been approved, and so I think that's another conversation for a different day on if you wanted to change this document.
Okay.
So
and legal counsel agrees, so that's something for us to consider once we get the skeleton in place, so to speak. It's okay. So now we go back, and there's some recommendations we have for how we get to that we like staff to consider. In that, and again, I would recommend I think we would want the assessment team to be involved in that, because we don't want to ask them for a survey if they're already doing one. For an example, there's some questions on the climate survey that I think would really be helpful, and they've used that in the past. Let's not have a whole new survey of students. We have so they may say, hey, there's some things we can pull from here, and that would be helpful as well. So that'd be the next step as we continue to go further in terms of our mid-year review and so on. Okay, so really what we're looking at then is the model. Back to the model, as we've discussed it, what it looks like. Yes, there are opportunities for the community and teachers and students and families to be involved, to have a voice in this as well. And we talked about how we use that as a board. That survey is not a part of the evaluation. We use it to inform our ratings.
Right. That's right.
Okay. All right, we've already asked for public comment on this, so if looking for a motion, if it's the pleasure of the board to approve the model. Who's bold enough on this? Oh, Trustee Church, another motion. Come on now.
How about so moved?
We'll take that. All right. Thank you. So moved and so seconded. Thank you, Trustee Rodriguez. All right. Any further discussion? It's good to work through. I know this is arduous. I know it for all of us. It's arduous, and we've been here a long time, but it's really, really important. So just kudos to everyone. And again, Dr. Osprey, thank you for coming to help us. Can you imagine doing this without his help? Oh, my.
Yes, I can imagine it.
Yeah, no, and it's not pretty. And it is not pretty. It is not pretty. All right. Okay, so there's a motion on the floor to approve the model as presented from Dr. Alsbury, and this is the model for our evaluation, superintendent evaluation process for the 2022-23 school year. Further discussion? All right, seeing none. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? All right, the motion is carried. Let the record show it is unanimous. It is unanimous. Okay, and then the last piece of this, Dr.
Yeah,
Chris,
when-
what time's lunch coming, Vanjie? Oh, why don't we do this, if we may, because we should have a working lunch, because we know we have a very important appointment that we know we all need to get to, right? So why don't we take, let's say, about 15 minutes, right? And everyone will bring our food back in, all right? And then we can have, because this is, we're going to want to have some good conversation on this part as well. And so let's take a short little recess, make a call if you need to and so on, come back in, and then we'll work through it. Okay? Thank you, everybody. So we're on quick lunch recess. This isn't early, is it?
No.
No, I don't think so. Okay. Because I want to be respectful of that. Okay, why don't we go ahead and jump back in, and where we are now is the last decision point that Dr. Alsbury placed before us, and I thank you for bringing your half of sandwiches and chips and so on back. Please excuse us if you're watching for eating as we meet, but we really need to really want to make sure we get through this before we take off. We have an appointment this afternoon, and then we'll be back at 4 o'clock for our regular meeting of the Board of Trustees. But our last decision point on this is really making the decisions around the goals and objectives going forward. Now, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Alsbury. And Dr. Alsbury, if you would, will you remind us of your recommendations around goals and objectives? And then just as a place of work, remember, we're looking at these. They've already been kind of culled back with the superintendent's input to make sure that what we have are the things that she deems as most important and pulled out really from her her entry plan. Right? Remember, she put the entry plan, and we're going to see some more of that later on. So she's been involved in this conversation as well. So that consideration has been here. And again, you know, if you see this come back up on another agenda, it's because we've made some tweaks after having the conversation with Susan. But I feel like we're still in alignment from conversations I've had with her around this. Vanjie, would you concur with that so far? Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yes, you have. All right, so that being said, and then Vanjie and Dr. Alsbury has already kind of just put that on the screen for us. And the process that we will use is, as we talk about this a little bit, and Dr. Alsbury is going to remind us of his recommendations for how many areas that we have that we're working on. Remember, this is for 1 year, and then we will all vote, and he's recommending that we vote on 6 of what we see before us on this page, which is also on the screen. And then, and Vanjie has some sheets for us to be able to utilize that. We vote on 6 of those to be able to pull together and hopefully work toward a manageable list of goals and objectives. Yes, Trustee Smith?
But not these, because these are the micro level. We're
Yeah.
going to only be voting on going to the 10s, like, for example, 1.1, 2.1, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5. We're not going down to these micro level.
No, because
Okay.
in this, and Dr. Alsbury has this as well. Thank you for that. If you look at goal 1, grad rates as academic growth, right? Grad rates, English language exit rates and assessments, they're the same objective, 1.1. So that's one objective. So as we include that, that's one objective, 1.1. And there are several of those, and he'll take us through that as we go. So thank you. Please, Dr. Alsbury.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, Trustee Smith. And in order to just avoid any potential confusion for the trustees, we have a document that you should be receiving here any moment. Do we have those yet? They're being printed right now, and they're just going to show the objectives, because my recommendation is to pick 6 objectives. And so that you don't have to glean through these on your own. We have a new sheet. It just shows the objectives that the superintendent and everyone has agreed that would be attainable, potentially attainable, and they're probably going to be here. There'll be a place for your name. I would recommend strongly that you open up this response to recovery, the blue packet, and as you're making your decisions, or go back and remind yourself of what those objectives are before you make your choices of 6 that you think are the most important. And then we thought if you had any, President Taylor, correct me if you want to do this differently, but I think that after folks have had an opportunity to look through this and make their marks of the 6, that you wanted to perhaps have an opportunity for board members to make comments, and then I'm going to collect your selections and tally them to see if we have agreement, and kind of whittle it down. So maybe the conversation we're having is how to make a decision on 1 or 2 rather than how to make a decision on 15 or 20, which would put us here probably a while.
Longer than we can be here.
Longer than we have.
Yeah.
So that's the
yeah.
plan.
Thank
Does
you.
that make sense?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, President Taylor, did you want the board to make comments on any of the objectives prior to us tallying? How would you like to do that?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Osbury. Yeah, we each have two because it may take more than one vote.
Gotcha.
So JJ's just being forward thinking and Vanjie giving us our copies. What you have before you is, again, as we've been looking at the potential areas of focus and connecting right to what Trustee Smith said, and you just shared that with me too, Tom, and I've forgotten about Dr. Osbury, is you see all of the objectives here. You see all of the really initiatives here, but some of them are the same objective. And so the objectives were consolidated. So for an example, under academic growth, all of those are one objective. That's why under academic growth, you only see 1.1. Even though there are 3 on our larger list, they're all the same objective. And then under goal 2, they're 4 separate objectives. Okay, and 3, you can see as you go on 3, there are 3 different objectives. 4, there are 2 objectives, and 5, there are 2 objectives. From these objectives, this is where he's going to ask us to vote on 6 of them. Right, 6 of them. Now, as a point of reference, if you want some more details, let me remember, because it was a while ago when we approved response to recovery. Let me remember exactly what is objective 2.3. Grab your response to recovery and look in here and get to 2.3, and then you can see what that objective is, and then the initiatives that were a part of that. Yes, Trustee Smith?
The suggestion is 6, right?
It's a suggestion. Yeah, we all have to vote.
That's right.
I see you, Trustee Smith. I hear you. All right, we're all going to vote on 6. His recommendation is that we land on 6-ish. Okay, so we don't vote on 6-ish. We vote on 6. And then when you put them together, there may be 2 or 3 that are close or something like that, and then the board decides, okay, hey, let's have 7. Right, whatever the case may be. Okay, and we can decide that. Yes, sir, Trustee Church?
I'm sorry, I raised my hand like I'm back in class.
That's all right. It feels like it. This is academic this morning, man.
This is confusing. I think I've got it. So do we put a check mark under include? Do we
Yes.
put a number 1 through 6?
No, you don't. No ranking. No ranking is necessary.
Just,
Make
just
it a
put
little more
check.
complicated. Help me through this.
Yeah, that would make it more complicated if we ranked.
All right, so now under academic growth, to me, that's important. I'm going to come right out and say that's important.
Okay, sure, that's okay.
But where it says 1.11, increased graduation rates.
No, 1.1. You're just going to 1.1.
Okay, so
Go to this,
we're
go
not
to this
getting
sheet
into the
right
weeds
here.
about how
Remember,
we do it.
we are the what. That is the how.
Got it.
And so we have the how in front of us, and this kind of takes the how. We don't get to do the how,
Got it.
right? That's not
I
our
think
job.
I've got it.
Make sense now?
I'll probably get a C on this, but okay.
So, but you still pass. You still pass.
I'll get a 2.9 or
Okay,
something.
where's that rating? Where's that scale? Okay, wait, sorry. Where's that scale? Yes, Trustee Smith.
One more thing, and you can't mess this. As long as you can do 6 check marks, you got this. You're going to get an A. But later on in another conversation, we could, let's say 1.1 is one of those, like we talked about, and I had already taken that note on my paper, that some of these percentage points are just simply not attainable. They may have been right years ago when this was adopted, but could we go back with the superintendent later and talk about improvement or progress as opposed to these exact metrics? Is that still within our purview at a later point?
I'm thinking, we voted on those metrics, right, as they were presenting them to us, right, mid-year review, right? We voted on those metrics, and so I think as a board, we can decide, do we want to take the time and change those metrics, or do we want to have in our mind that when it's time and when we get the report for this year, right, that probably may not have been the best metric. It's really up to the way the way the board wants to do it, and that detail of it.
Yeah, and that's a good conversation to have because, for example, when we look at some of these things, there's layering that needed to have been achieved in previous years. So Superintendent Enfield is now dependent on hitting a number based on someone else, and I'm really cautious about that.
Okay, now let me bring you this. I'm glad you brought that up, and that is why we have this material. Because what this material is, right, is when each of these were presented to us, right, and this was our goal, and as you said, we didn't even hit the previous year. How are we going to hit this year? Though they were adjusted.
Yes. And I do have all those. I know now is not the time for that conversation, but I will say that Dr. Osbury's guidance to us about the stickiness
number
of
versus the
numbers
percentage.
very much resonated with me, and I had
Mm-hmm.
already previously taken some notes. So maybe when we get to that part, after we narrow these down, possibly we could have a conversation about, are we interested in making some adjustments?
Yeah, and I would say this, and that too would be a much longer conversation, just because there are a lot of we were numbers we were numbers are good. We want numbers, right? And now you've enlightened us some on that, Dr. Alsbury. So that's something that would have to be throughout. But what we have in terms, don't get stuck on the, so to speak, on the numbers in response to recovery, because all of those were updated here. Right, I shouldn't say all of them. Some of them stayed the same, but many of them were updated. With the effects of COVID and so on. Many of them were updated, and that's what this data is. It tells us here's the meeting. This is what they presented to us. This is what they were changed to. So if we're going to have that conversation about changing some of these, it needs to start with what's the current one, because that might be. It might be more acceptable. Oh, well, I see it was a 2, but we saw that didn't happen. So, right?
Totally tracking with you.
Okay.
And I also recognize that, again, this is a bridge year review for her.
Exactly.
And we can always make future strategic plans and goals with her a little bit differently.
Make it
but yeah,
more
I'm tracking
reflective.
with all that. Okay, thank you.
And so that's why I think we might want to just think about it before we go through. That's a really arduous process to go through for all. We won't end up with 60, but it may be 10 of these to go through all of those. But within 1.1 is 6 or 7, 4 or 5 different things. So it's going through all of those for a 1-year strategic plan, right? That we know is really just a 1-year strategic plan. So that's just for us to have a bigger conversation about. Okay, I think I saw Dr. Nicolette first, and then Trustee Church, and then Trustee Mayberry. We're just going to go back and forth.
And thank you, Trustee Beth. I understand the angst about this, holding someone responsible for a decision they weren't a part of. I take great comfort in this. Throughout our experiences before hire, during the hiring process, and currently, Dr. Enfield is totally aware of our response to recovery plan, and she's taken it under her wing, and she's embraced it as she should, recognizing, of course, that there are some gaps and things to work on. And that's why I think the potential areas of focus for the current response to recovery strategic plan are so important, because no one knows better than Dr. Enfield what she's been working on since she started in July. And so, again, I am going to continue to refer to the work that's already been accomplished through superintendent's review of her own work and the response, because that can help align. And for me myself, that will help me not try and put burdens on her that are unreasonable, which at this point I don't know if that could happen with her, because she's so fully aware of our document.
And one thing I will say before we go to Trustee Mayberry is, remember, this is part of the information that informs our final ratings, right? So in considering this, it could be, just for an example, you know what, some of these numbers, they weren't fair, whatever it is. So I'm going to consider that as I inform the rating that I actually give her. This is not the rating. Right, this helps to inform the rating, like the survey information and whatever else that we have. So it helps so I can consider it as I'm considering my rating.
That's right.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Trustee Mayberry.
Thank you, Madam President. 3 quick questions, and again, I apologize. It probably sounds like a broken record, but we're not selecting goals; we're selecting objectives.
That's correct.
2, I noticed. Again, you probably touched on this, my apologies. I noticed some of the objectives, like in objective academic growth, there's 5 objectives. On the form, there's only 1. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, when the superintendent and Vanjie and Angie came together to allow the superintendent to identify areas
Okay.
that she felt she could focus on. These were the ones she selected.
Yes, okay, thank you. And then finally, sort of piggybacking on Trustee Smith's comments earlier, if I understand them correctly, if I'm aligning with her correctly, once we zero in on these, I mean, there's opportunities to maybe make some adjustments, some tweaks.
Yeah, there's two areas, and I don't want to open up another conversation, but let me just kind of make the comment anyway. One is I would defer back to President Taylor's comments. The board can always go back and make adjustments to the recovery document here. The second thing is I would encourage, when you have an opportunity, and of course this is a process, understand that when you're doing your scoring for the superintendent evaluation, that's going to be happening in October of 2023. So we've got some time, and in the meantime, between now and then, you'll notice that I will send you the evaluation tool, and the sample that I gave you in the training, we didn't spend a lot of detailed time, but you'll notice the rubric also gives you some flex in there, okay? And Trustee Smith, this would be good for you to know too. So you'll notice that the rubric, when there's a number, what I indicate, I do this intentionally, is that a lack of proficiency or unsatisfactory is the right terms here, would be an indicator that the superintendent did nothing to move toward that goal. The next category would be that the superintendent put things in place to move toward the goal but didn't reach the goal. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So just because the goal number wasn't reached, it doesn't mean that you are stuck in giving an unsatisfactory rating, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That was actually a really good point to bring out. And he mentioned, the sample, which is on page 24. So it wouldn't necessarily disqualify Superintendent Enfield if a particular number was not met.
Right.
And say, up, that means you're unsatisfactory. No, it says that some things were put in place, and that's, again, part of what we keep in mind, because we know, she was here 20 minutes and we did this evaluation. Okay, that makes sense. Trustee Church? Thank you, Trustee.
And if you covered it while I was doing my little check marks, I apologize. So on goal 4, how come we're only listing 4.1, 4.3 when there's actually 6 of them?
Okay,
Yeah,
you're right. You missed it. You're right. Good. He just asked it. Yep, that's okay. Please go right ahead. That's right.
That's
right.
okay.
That's all right.
These were when the superintendent and Vanjie and President Taylor went over the goals that the superintendent felt were achievable. These are the ones she indicated. So that's why.
Are we bound by that? Are we bound by that?
No, those are the recommendations, because when you look at as Dr. Alsbury said, the objectives and then the initiatives, there are just too many of them, especially when you get in as late as she did at this point in this year on the last year of a strategic plan. But it doesn't mean we still don't evaluate and don't use it. So based upon her entry plan, and she spoke about those things that were important that she would be focusing on, that's where the recommendations originally for the potential areas of focus.
And I mean, I like that, because if you remember, the reason why she didn't have performance goals when she first started was this whole idea of give her time to get here,
Right.
figure out what's important, where the priorities are, and allow us to have input with her to develop these objectives, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely, because again, this is something we want done together with her, not to her. But then she kind of inherited it, and it's a matter of, okay, we know there's 60 of them out there, and clearly we're in different places with each of them. So let's say, what are those things that you, based upon what you've noticed, what's in your entry plan, what you're going to be focusing on, that the board, as we've already identified this many, how much in here that we've identified are in alignment? Where's that overlap between what was here and what you see? Oh, this is where that overlap is, and that's where we landed.
Also,
Trustee Church, did that answer that question for you, sir? Okay.
Also, I would just add on to that Dr. Enfield is pretty experienced, and and I don't want to speak for her, but if I had to guess, when she looked through these various objectives, she probably selected ones that she felt had a chance of being achievable in this first year. That I would guess that does not mean that she's not going to work on the other objectives, but she may realize that the outcomes are not going to become apparent until we hit year 2 or year 3. So that would be a guess as to why some of these objectives she didn't select. Because it doesn't mean she won't work on them, it just means that she won't have data to indicate achievement on those for another year.
And I think you're absolutely right. And Danji, please jump in if I'm speaking out of turn. But that's why this is called potential areas of focus. It doesn't mean other things aren't getting done. Those things are already in place. Those programs are there, right? Those targets are there. But what will you focus on in this first year, 1 year, right now? Everybody good? Exhale. Everybody good? Okay, so this, if I may, Tom, what our first step will be is if you look at her, JJ. JJ gave us two sheets. Don't forget to put your name on the top. As a matter of fact, do that right now so we don't forget.
Public record.
Okay, because it absolutely is public record. Put your name on the top.
I did that first. I learned that in kindergarten.
Yep, do that so we don't forget. So this.
Do you need to look over our neighbor's shoulder?
No. Look. All right, no, I haven't done mine yet. I've been running the dang meeting, see? So then what we do, remember, you get 6 check marks. 6 check marks. So we're looking at objectives, and then where the goals fall. Okay? 6 check marks, and then when you are ready, we're going to turn it into JJ. Yes, sir.
I am going to ask that silly question. Can you mark something twice?
No.
Okay.
But we're gonna have the chance to do it.
Yeah, when it comes,
It's not like a trustee appointment
right, it's not over.
to really champion it.
Yeah, that's right.
It is a good question.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Trustee Smith.
Will absolutely champion it. I'll tell you right at the start that out of respect and not choosing.
Thank you for following the rules.
Very curious to see where we land. I have 7.
She was trying to stick that 7 in.
Yeah, I saw it.
Clarified rules.
Yeah, that's why I said, I see you, Trustee Smith.
And then we have another one for updates if we need them. I'm ready. Then she reads them all out loud.
I'm not reading them out loud. Oh, she does read, yeah.
Yeah. JJ, she's right behind me also. Sorry, Neil. I'm staring hard at me. I know, I thought that's
It is International Angie Day.
Today's International Angie.
Angela Lansbury.
Oh,
Not you.
no, Lansbury, thank you. Let the record show that I'm not the Angela that is no longer with us. That's important to.
Well, obviously.
Oh,
You never thought she was going to.
I know, huh?
She 100?
Now I want to watch like the Mouse and Broomstick.
Oh, I was thinking of Murder She
Mm-hmm.
Murder She Wrote is also great, but I love that Mouse and Broomstick.
Never get around her because she'll be accused of rape.
All right, you gotta vote, you gotta vote, come on.
Yeah, you gotta watch Diane.
Watch the time here.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm putting my name on this paper now, so I'm all ready. Okay, I'll check this in. My thinking is the right way of thinking, just saying. Oh, holy cow. You know, I was listening to the radio. And the
Are you going to do this again on the next voting thing? Oh. I did mine well, the discussion of scores.
Yes, yeah, I can
That's
do
the way I
that.
always did my math.
All right, so what Ms. JJ is going
Are
to,
you going to tally them? Or?
she's going to read them out loud.
Okay, I'll tally while you read. Okay.
Yes, that was a requirement, Trustee Mayberry. Yes.
Trustee Mayberry selected objective 1.1, 2.1, 2.3, 3.3, 4.1, 5.2. Trustee Church selected objectives 1.1, 2.1, 2.5, 4.1, 5.1, and 5.2. Trustee Smith selected objectives 1.1, 2.1, 3.1, 4.1, 5.1, and 5.2. Trustee Minetto selected objectives 1.1, 2.3, 2.5, 3.1, 4.1, and 5.1. Trustee Rodriguez selected objectives 1.1, 2.1, 3.1, 4.3, 5.1, 5.2. Trustee Nicolette selected objectives 1.1, 2.1, 2.5, 3.2, 4.1.
Wait, there's no 3.2.
She wrote it in.
Okay. Leave it to Dr. Don.
And 5.1.
So what were the last two?
I'm sorry, what were the last two? Yeah.
4.1 and 5.2, or 5.1. Trustee Taylor selected objectives 1.1, 2.1, 2.3, 3.1, 4.3, and 5.1.
All right, so it looks like, and Tom is tallying, but it's a couple of them are pretty obvious.
Yeah.
1.1, certainly obvious. 2.1, obvious. 5.1, obvious. And it looks like really 4.1,
Yes.
and it looks like 3.1 also has 4.
Yes. I have 6
1, 2,
that
3, 4,
have
5.
between 4 and 7 votes, which would be the majority. There are, and that gives us 6 of the objectives. The ones remaining have 3, 2.3 has 3 votes, 2.5 has 3 votes, 4.3 has 2 votes, 3.3 1 vote, 3.2 1 vote.
So
Can we just go down from top to bottom and do like from 7 to 0,
Yep,
how much
sure
each one
can.
has? Thank you.
Sure, please go ahead.
Sure,
Tom.
1.1, 7 votes. Objective 2.1, 6 votes. Objective 2.3, 3 votes. Objective 2.4, 0 votes. Objective 2.5, 3 votes. Objective 3.1, 4 votes. Objective 3.2, 1 vote. That's a write-in. Objective, objective 3.3, 1 vote. Objective 3.5, 0. 4.1 is 5 votes. 4.3, 2 votes, 5.1, 6 votes, and 5.2, 4 votes.
Okay. All right, so it looks as though, so again, if we take 7, 6, 5, and 4, right, if we take 7, 6, 5, and 4,
3.1 had how many? It was
4.
4. Okay, that's what I thought.
Okay, so if we take those that had 7, so let me go down. In my thinking, it looks as though we have 1.1 with 7 votes. Okay, these are the ones that are clearly supported. 2.1 with 6 votes. 3.1 with 4 votes. 4.1 with 5 votes. And 5.1 with 6 votes. And 5.2 with 4 votes.
Right.
And then from really the only ones that quote unquote, I guess for lack of a better, get, I'm going to say left behind for lack of a, that didn't quite make the cut was 3.2. I'm sorry, 2.3. My bad. Said it backwards. What did I? Is that 2.3? And then 2.5. Just those two.
Huh?
Those are the two that had 3.
Oh, okay. See what you're saying. So shouldn't we go with the?
So it looks like we have a pretty clear 6, with a cut at 4. That's more than half. That's kind of a quorum.
Works for me.
Yeah, that's kind of a quorum. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, all right, everybody good and clear, Trustee Smith?
So I love these. I'm in full support of all of these. I'm gonna throw it out there that if there was another one, and I know you said that there could possibly, so I'm gonna advocate for one more, okay?
Okay.
And that is 2.3. And the reason is the reality is that we have an incredibly difficult situation with the team that we already have. I am in full support of 2.1. It is where I put my vote. If I had had a 7th vote, I would have voted for 2.3, and that is because I just inherently would like to keep the focus on our existing team. So if I were to make a pitch for a 4th one, and had I had a 7th vote, it would have been 2.3.
Okay. Trustee Mayberry?
I mean, for what it's worth, I know this is not a motion, but I second that. I mean, that was extremely important to me as well. I mean, I think that's the thrust of where we need to focus when it comes to our complement.
Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Nicolette?
Well, as long as we're championing, in the 6 that we chose, I'm a little hard pressed to see a focus on family engagement, and I know that that's happening. And to me, they're the first and forever teachers, and I would like us to look at what's being accomplished right now, and it is as it relates to our families and student learning.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Nicolette. Trustee Church?
Just on that 2.3 issue, obviously, that's very big for me. However, I think it's kind of implicit under 2.1. I mean, I know it doesn't say retention, but I think it sends the message to the superintendent when we mark 2.1 as all 6 of us, that kind of implies retention as well. So I personally am happy the way we are with the 6 we've selected, but I agree 100% with what Trustee Smith says. I just think it's kind of, as we get into the weeds, we can maybe discuss that.
Okay. Thank you, Trustee Church. Trustee Minetto?
Thank you, Madam President. We have to remember that these are but these are the objectives we're looking at. It doesn't mean she's going to throw everything else out. She's still going to work on all the stuff, just like teachers. When you give me my objective as a teacher, that's what the principal's coming to see me do, that doesn't mean everything else goes away. I continue my job. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Minetto. I will add this. I voted for 2.3, so obviously I think that's important. I hear what you're saying, Trustee Church, but I think they're separated on here because it takes different efforts. It's one effort to recruit. It's a whole different effort to retain. And I just think it's important to send the message to the employees, the team members that we have, that keeping them is really important to the board. I think that it could be implied in recruiting, but because it's two different things, I think it's important to make sure that doesn't get left behind.
President Taylor, question for the order that we would take. It feels like we have a lot of consensus around the 6. I would like to continue to champion for the 1, but would it make sense to make an initial motion on these 6 that we have some clear consensus around and then continue a conversation around an additional 1?
We can.
That way so we can maintain our joint consistency around these 6, and then people that do or don't, because I am going to continue to advocate for that, but I don't want to lose the consensus on these 6.
Okay,
would you be open to a motion on
I'm
that?
open to a motion for that, and then if there is another motion in the second, we have conversation about adding a 7th to that. Does that work for you, Dr. Olson?
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine.
Okay.
And just if you guys are keeping count, by my count, so far there's 4 trustees have advocated for 2.3.
Okay. Well, no, because Trustee Smith threw in after the fact.
Yeah, well, no, I said if I had had a 7th
you'd had a 7th vote,
but
yeah.
I don't want there to be confusion around the universality of these 6.
Oh,
So if
absolutely.
you'd be open, I'd like to make a motion on
Absolutely.
these 6, and then we can separate that out for if there
Absolutely.
would be any additional ones.
Go right ahead.
So with that, I move that the Board of Trustees adopt the following objectives for Superintendent Enfield's review. Objective 1.1, Objective 2.1, Objective 3.1, Objective 4.1, Objective 5.1, and Objective 5.2.
Okay, there is a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded from Trustee Rodriguez. Do we have any public comment on any of this piece of it? Okay, thank you, JJ. Okay, seeing no further discussion, all those in
Wait,
favor?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat your numbers, please? Thank you. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. 1.1, 2.1, 3.1, 4.1, 5.1, and 5.2.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. Opposition? Okay, the motion carries. Let the record show that it is unanimous, so we have 6. And now looking to the pleasure of the board if there are any additional considerations we should have at this time.
All right. So it's
Okay,
Nevada
Trustee Smith?
and lucky number 7. So I'm going to make my pitch for Objective 2.3. We can certainly have more dialogue on it, but I am prepared to make a motion that would be a 7th objective.
Okay. So move, is that just your motion?
Yes.
There is a motion on the floor that Objective 2.3 be included as a 7th. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded from Trustee Mayberry. Discussion?
I wanted to ask Dr. Owlsbury how he felt.
Okay.
Well, it's really the board's decision. I think it's perfectly fine to have 7. I said around 6. And as I mentioned before, from the comments that I heard around the room, it sounded like 4 different trustees were advocating for 2.3 as a strong consideration if they had had a 7th vote. So it seems like there was somewhat of a consensus around 2.3. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Owlsbury. Further discussion? Okay, seeing none. So the motion on the floor is to include Objective 2.3, and we'll have 7 areas of focus for Dr. Enfield for this school year. No public comment on this. We already talked. Okay, great. Thank you. All those in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposition? The motion carries. Let the record show it is unanimous. So we have 7. We still have 5 goals, it looks like. And we have 7 objectives, because there's some under each of those goals. And that, I believe, Dr. Owlsbury, was decision point number 4.
That was the last one.
Okay. The next steps from here, Dr. Owlsbury?
Yeah, so thank you very much to the board members. That was a lot of big decisions to make in a fairly short amount of time. So thank you so much for that. What I'm going to do is work at this point. Of course, I'm working under your guidance and direction, but my understanding is that I'll work with Vanjie. We will put together a handbook that includes all of the details that you, including the changes and revisions that you voted on, which will be a superintendent handbook, evaluation handbook, just so that it's all in one place and finalized, and we'll provide that to the board. And I think that really was it, President Taylor, until we get to October. Well, the second thing is that you'll receive the full evaluation tool from me, which incorporates all 7 of these objectives into that. So I'll send that to you. And then, notwithstanding any additional revisions that the board would desire, then we're looking at October 2023, which is where we'll start the actual formal creation of the single evaluation tool or report as we reviewed in the training. So that would be it. And of course, other than that, I'll just reinforce, President Taylor, what you noted. It has been because of COVID primarily. When the district adopted balanced governance, one of the things in your policy that you adopted was to do an annual evaluation for the board, and we haven't done that, which is fine because it was COVID and a lot of things didn't happen. But I would certainly be open to continuing that and doing an evaluation this year with the board. I think that could be very helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Alsbury. I'll add a couple of things just in terms of next steps. So this gives remember, Susan and I will have a conversation. We'll share this with her, and Vanjie will certainly will be in the room to help make sure we move forward with what it is that we've agreed upon, that the board has voted on. I don't anticipate, because it's actually a little bit tighter than what she originally alluded to. So I don't anticipate any challenges with it. But if so, of course, it comes right back here to the board. It comes right back here to the board for the board to consider those changes. And then what will happen from there is beginning to look at those 7 objectives and looking for we call it the mid-year review. But as we begin to get data on that and look at how we're doing with those targets that were set, we can certainly look at, do we need to reset any of those 7 targets? It's up to the board. As Trustee Smith alluded to, I don't know that we should. Again, it's a 1-year consultant, but it's certainly that we're the board. So we can decide how we want to move forward, right? We can decide that, but really just give staff an opportunity to say, here are the 7 things that we're going to be working on to bring back to the board when we have when it's time to do some reporting on that. And I think that staff is probably going to say, "Ooh, only 7?" Right? So that's great as opposed to the 60 or whatever that we've had. But that's okay, because we're learning and getting better. That's why having an outside consultant is really, really helpful. Dr. Alsbury does not continue to work with a lot of districts, but he's continued to partner with us. And as we can see by all that we got through today, I mean, your work was necessary. Thank you for guiding us through it. To the board, we just trudged through what could take 2 days to do.
Easy.
Certainly, we really did, and just really everybody just really pressed in to get us in the positions, because now if as the superintendent, great, she knows where she's going, she knows what the board's looking for, and can just go to work and focus on it. So it's really good to get this done in one shot on this day. So I think that's it here. In terms of the future, we'll need to continue to be in touch based upon any kind of orientation that new board members haven't had a chance to participate in, right? Once that happens, and then from there, take a look at, getting back on the schedule. I think we would do that more towards the summertime.
Right.
Because it's a little bit slower, the board self-evaluation, to begin to look at that work as well. So we're fortunate to have your guidance, so thank you.
That's great, and thank you. Just on a personal note, as some of you know, in addition to a selected number of districts that I get the opportunity to work with. I'm still at the university as a professor, teaching doctoral courses and directing. I think I have 12 doctoral dissertations. But that left me at home every day, and since my wife works out of her office, she said, isn't there some place you could be other than here? So I mention that because my phone has been buzzing, because what I decided to do for fun is I became a full-time high school chemistry and biology teacher again. And so I have students at the high school at home buzzing me because they're all taking a big exam today with the substitute. I think that's funny. But they really love this. I share with them some of these things that I get to do, and they really think they're cool. So, thanks again.
Well, they are. Well, they are. All right. Do we have any closing public comment? We do not. We do not? All right, everybody. Well, we'll be dismissed. We know we need to be at a school, right, for a special presentation. We've asked, I spoke with Ms. Anderson, Michelle. She said 2:15, no later than 2:15 is when we want to be there. And remember, I'm not mentioning school because it's still under sequester. So we know where we're going and what we're doing. And then we will meet right back here at 4 p.m. The celebration of International Angie Day continues. We meet back here at 4.
I don't remember the proclamation.
Yes, well, there was one. You were gone that day. We'll meet back here at 4 o'clock for our regular meeting, of the board. All right, everybody, we are dismissed. Thank you, everybody. Yes, this